On November 1st, 1396, the solemn halls of St. Paul's Cathedral in London shimmered with the light of hundreds of candles, their flames dancing against towering Gothic windows. The sound of the organ reverberated through the cathedral's naves as a majestic procession made its way down the central aisle. But this was no ordinary celebration. It marked the wedding of a child barely 6 years old. Isabel of France, the youngest princess in Europe, slowly walked toward the altar. Awaiting her was Richard II, the King of England, a man of 29, draped in opulent golden silks trailing across the stone floor. The tiny girl could hardly bear the weight of her delicate crown. Within moments, she would be crowned Queen of England, sealing a political pact that would reshape the destinies of two nations. How could one so young become the centerpiece of such high-stakes medieval diplomacy? To understand Isabel's tragic journey, we must return to 14th century France, a kingdom steeped in turmoil and shadowed by royal madness. Isabel was born on November 9th, 1389, in the Louvre Palace. She was the daughter of King Charles VI of France and Queen Isabel of Bavaria. As the fourth daughter of this royal couple, Isabel entered a world already fraught with darkness. Her father, known as Charles the Mad, suffered from severe mental illness from the age of 24. During his episodes, he failed to recognize his own family, believed he was made of fragile glass, and would flee through palace corridors, screaming about invisible attackers. France in this time was governed by power-hungry regents as the king remained imprisoned within his own fractured mind. Isabel's mother, Isabel of Bavaria, became notorious for her ambition and lack of scruples. Exploiting her husband's condition, she amassed power and wealth while ignoring her children. Chroniclers of the period painted her as immoral and self-indulgent, more invested in her lovers than her daughters. For Isabel, her daughters were not children. They were bargaining chips in the high-stakes game of European alliances. Isabel grew up within a palace steeped in political plotting and instability. France was crumbling under the 100 Years' War with England, plagued by internal strife between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, and suffering under the long shadow of royal instability. For a child as sensitive as Isabel, witnessing her father's madness and her mother's cold calculation left deep emotional wounds. At the age of 6, a diplomatic opportunity emerged that would forever alter her life. King Richard II of England, seeking to solidify his weakening position after years of war, reached out for peace. Having recently lost his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, Richard now needed a new marriage to bring both political and financial advantages. French advisors, led by the Duke of Berry, recognized a golden opportunity. They proposed a union between Isabel and Richard, offering a staggering dowry of £800,000 and a truce lasting 28 years. For war-weary and bankrupt France, the proposition was irresistible, even if it required sacrificing a child. Negotiations dragged on for months, devoid of sentiment and carried out with the clinical detachment of merchants. Both parties debated the terms as if Isabel were livestock to be exchanged. Even her age, shockingly young even by medieval norms, became a point of contention. Some English officials suggested waiting until she was 12, the commonly accepted age for consummating a marriage. But Richard, under siege from internal rebellion and financial collapse, could not afford delay. For him, securing French gold and peace outweighed any concern for his bride's age. By October 1396, the terms were finalized. Isabel would be sent to England as a diplomatic offering, a child offered on the altar of international politics. Her farewell from France was a grand performance meant to awe the English envoys. At the Louvre, King Charles, briefly lucid, tearfully blessed his daughter. Isabeau treated the parting with her characteristic coldness, viewing it as a successful negotiation. Isabel herself scarcely understood what was happening. To her, the journey was perhaps just a temporary adventure. She took with her a few precious toys, a favorite doll, and a beloved small dog from the palace. Her entourage included hundreds of nobles, attendants, and elite guards charged with protecting the royal treasure. The journey from Calais to London stretched over several weeks, each city offering extravagant receptions. Local dignitaries competed to display the most lavish hospitality for the future queen. But Isabel, overwhelmed and weary, often cried and begged to return home. In London, Richard II orchestrated a wedding that rivaled any royal spectacle. The cathedral was adorned with intertwined French and English fabrics, symbolizing unity. Thousands of candles imported from France bathed the space in golden light as choirs sang in Latin and French. The spectacle was meant not just to impress the public, but to declare to the world that England had brokered peace. Richard, elegant and artistic, was visibly uncomfortable. He had once deeply loved his first wife and now faced the burden of marrying a child. But duty eclipsed personal feelings. Isabel remained quiet throughout the ceremony, clearly frightened by the grandeur around her. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to kneel to slip the ring onto her small hand as she searched the crowd for familiar faces, none of which remained. Declared Queen of England, she showed no joy, only confusion and rising fear. Initially, her young age provided a kind of shield. Richard treated her more as a daughter than a spouse. He ensured she had French tutors and allowed her to retain her language and traditions. She was given her own quarters at Westminster Palace, along with a manor and devoted staff. But this protected world collapsed in September 1399. Richard II, besieged by the forces of Henry Bolingbroke, was overthrown and later murdered in Pontefract Castle. At just 10 years old, Isabel was now a widow, though never a wife in truth. Her unconsummated marriage left her in political limbo. No heirs, no dowry to return. The £800,000 had already vanished into English coffers. Henry IV, the new king, saw value in Isabel as a potential pawn. He detained her at Havering Castle in relative comfort, hoping she might serve future diplomatic uses. Isabel, now maturing rapidly through sorrow, wrote desperate letters to her French family. One such letter to her father read, "I write to you in tears, for I am held here like a prisoner, far from all I love, with no hope of return." Her pleas eventually pierced the heart of Charles VI, who, in another lucid moment, demanded her release. After protracted negotiations, Isabel finally returned to France in 1401, but she was no longer the innocent child who had departed 5 years earlier. At 12, she had been aged beyond her years by trauma. Her return brought little joy. France remained in disarray, and her family welcomed her more as a political burden than a cherished daughter. Her ordeal was not yet over. In 1405, at the age of 16, Isabel was once again used as a diplomatic tool when her mother arranged a second marriage to Charles of Orléans, a poet and nobleman. But this union at last brought her something precious: love. Charles, tender and intellectual, genuinely cared for Isabel. Together they found joy in poetry, music, and shared affection. For the first time, Isabel knew what it meant to be cherished not for her rank, but for who she was. Yet happiness proved fleeting. In 1407, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and would spend the next 25 years imprisoned. Isabel, once more alone, returned to a life of solitude under the shadow of the French court. Twice her life had offered her love. Twice it had been taken. In the years that followed, she lived quietly, dedicating herself to charity and the arts. Her time as England's child queen had left her with a rare understanding of diplomacy, which she used discreetly to advise others within the court. In 1409, Isabel gave birth to her only daughter, Joan of Orléans, a child who would grow up never knowing her father. Though motherhood brought some comfort, it also underscored a painful truth. Her daughter, too, might become another pawn in dynastic politics. That same year, at just 20 years old, Isabel died from complications following childbirth. Her entire life had been dictated by political necessity. Given away at 6, widowed at 10, imprisoned at 12, remarried at 16, and widowed again in practice at 18, she never had a chance to live freely. Her death went unnoticed by most chroniclers, a grim contrast to the grandeur of her wedding day. Isabel had fulfilled her political purpose, producing an heir, sealing alliances, but never once lived for herself. Her story forces us to reckon with the dark costs of royal diplomacy and the price paid by the most innocent. Isabel's life exemplifies how noble children, especially girls, were bartered like goods in the name of national interest, their humanity erased by ambition. More than 6 centuries later, her story still echoes, a warning of the human cost of treating children as political assets. The little girl sent to secure peace between 2 warring kingdoms never truly had a childhood. She bore burdens meant for monarchs and paid for them with her happiness and her life. She remains a haunting symbol of how power can consume the vulnerable and of the forgotten lives behind every royal treaty.